Once upon a time in the New World, there lived a beautiful Native American princess who fell in love with an English explorer from a completely different world. Now, this may sound like the start of a Disney movie, but it's actually the story of Pocahontas and John Smith. In this episode, we're going to talk about the real story behind the legend of Pocahontas. So keep watching to find out more. In the early 1600s, two worlds collided in North America. On one side were the indigenous peoples who had lived on the land for thousands of years, and on the other were the English settlers who had just arrived and were eager to make their mark on the New World. Caught in the middle was a young Native American woman named Amunut, who would soon become famous by her English name, Pocahontas. Amunut was the daughter of the chief of the Powhatan tribe, a powerful group of Native Americans who lived in what is now Virginia. Her father, Chief Powhatan, was a wise and respected leader who had a deep understanding of the land and its people. He had always taught his daughter to be curious and respectful of all people, no matter where they were from. One day, a small group of English explorers arrived in the area. They were led by John Smith, a brave and determined man who was eager to explore the New World and make a name for himself back home in England. As soon as John Smith laid eyes on Amunut, he knew that she was something special. She was beautiful and graceful, and he could tell that she was also intelligent and kind. He wanted to learn more about her and her culture, but he also knew that there were those who would not approve of his interest in her. Despite the challenges, John Smith and Amunut began to spend time together. They talked for hours about their different cultures and traditions, and they learned from each other's experiences and perspectives. Amunut was fascinated by John Smith's stories of the outside world, and John Smith was amazed by Amunut's knowledge of the natural world. They developed a deep bond and respect for each other, and eventually they fell in love. As their relationship grew, so did the tension between the two groups. Some of the English settlers were suspicious of Amunut and her people, and some of the Native Americans were wary of the English and their ways. But John Smith and Amunut refused to let the hatred of others destroy what they had found. Together, they worked to build bridges between the two cultures, and they helped to create a sense of understanding and peace. However, their efforts were not always successful, and eventually the conflict between the two groups erupted into violence. John Smith and Amunut were caught in the middle, and they had to flee for their lives. They traveled through the wilderness for days, and they faced many dangers along the way. But they never gave up hope. They knew that if they could just find a place where they could live in peace, they would be able to build a new life together. Finally, after a long and difficult journey, they found a place where they could live in peace. And there they built a home and raised a family. John Smith and Amunut became known as legendary heroes who had bridged the gap between two different cultures and brought peace to a troubled land. Their story was passed down through generations, and it became a symbol of hope for people around the world. Okay, now let's talk about the historical truth behind the legend. Pocahontas and John Smith, a Native American princess and an English explorer whose legendary romance is said to have taken place in the early 17th century. The story goes that they met when Smith was captured by a Native American tribe and Pocahontas saved his life by preventing him from being killed. However, there is little evidence to support this story and it is generally considered to be a myth. The first written account of Pocahontas's life appeared in 1851, more than 200 years after the alleged events took place. The story was published in a book called The History of Virginia by writer and historian Robert Beverly. In the story, Pocahontas is portrayed as a noble savage who falls in love with the English explorer John Rolfe. However, this version of events is not supported by any historical records. Another popular version of the story was published in 1937 in a book called The Story of Pocahontas by author Ruth Sawyer. This version of the story is based on a legend that was passed down through generations of Native Americans. According to this legend, Pocahontas and John Smith did meet when Smith was captured by a Native American tribe. However, instead of saving his life, Pocahontas tricked him into marriage. This version of the story is also not supported by any historical records. Despite the lack of historical evidence, the story of Pocahontas has endured and has been romanticized in books, movies, and TV shows. One of the most famous portrayals of Pocahontas can be seen in the 1995 Disney movie Pocahontas. In the movie, Pocahontas is shown as a strong-willed Native American princess who falls in love with an English explorer named John Smith. The movie also features a number of historical figures, including Chief Sitting Bull and the English explorer Sir Francis Drake. However, the movie is not historically accurate and should not be taken as such. So, what do we really know about Pocahontas? There is very little known about Pocahontas's early life. She was probably born around the year 1596, but there are no surviving birth records. We also don't know much about her childhood or how she grew up. However, we do know that she was the daughter of Chief Powhatan, the leader of the Powhatan tribe, and that she had at least 3 brothers. One of the few historical records that mention Pocahontas comes from an English explorer named John Smith. In 1608, Smith wrote that he had been captured by a Native American tribe and that he had been sentenced to death. He claimed that Pocahontas had saved his life by throwing herself in front of him when he was about to be killed. However, this story is almost certainly a myth. There is no evidence to support it, and it is not mentioned in any other historical records. Another story about Pocahontas that is often told is the story of how she saved John Smith from execution by the Native Americans. This story is also not supported by any historical evidence, but it has been romanticized in books and movies. We do know that Pocahontas did meet an Englishman named John Rolfe. In 1614, Pocahontas married John Rolfe, an English tobacco planter. The marriage was probably arranged by her father, Chief Powhatan, and it was part of an effort to improve relations between the Powhatan tribe and the English settlers. The marriage was successful, and Pocahontas and Rolfe had a son together in 1615. In 1616, Pocahontas and her husband John Rolfe travelled to England. They were part of a group of Native Americans who were being shown off as curiosities to the English nobility. While in England, Pocahontas was baptized in the Church of England and given the Christian name Rebecca. She also met King James I and supposedly danced for his amusement. Pocahontas and her family returned to Virginia in 1617, but she became ill and died the following year. She was only 21 years old. The exact cause of her death is unknown, but it is believed that she may have died from a disease that was common in England at the time. The story of Pocahontas has been romanticized and fictionalized over the years. She has been portrayed as a noble savage who falls in love with an English explorer, but there is little evidence to support this story. In reality, Pocahontas was a Native American princess who lived in a time of great change and upheaval. She played an important role in the early history of the United States, and her story continues to fascinate people today. And what about John Smith? John Smith was an English explorer and colonizer who played a significant role in the early history of the United States. He was born in 1580 in Willoughby, Nottinghamshire, England, and he died in 1631 in Virginia. Smith's first voyage to North America was in 1607 when he was a member of an expedition that established the first permanent English settlement in North America at Jamestown, Virginia. After the settlement was established, Smith became one of the leaders of the colony and played a key role in helping it survive. He explored the surrounding area and established contact with several Native American tribes. In 1609, Smith was injured in an explosion and was forced to return to England. He spent several years recovering from his injuries and writing about his experiences in North America. When he returned to North America in 1614, he settled in the Virginia colony and married a Native American woman named Pocahontas. Through his marriage to Pocahontas, Smith became an important figure in the relationship between the English settlers and the local Native Americans. He continued to explore and map the area and played a role in the establishment of several other English settlements. In addition to his exploration and colonization efforts, Smith also wrote extensively about his experiences in North America. His writings provide valuable insights into the early history of the United States and the interactions between the English settlers and the Native Americans. John Smith was a controversial figure in the early history of the United States. He was a skilled explorer and colonizer who played an important role in the establishment of several English settlements in North America. However, he was also responsible for the deaths of several Native Americans, and his treatment of the Native Americans he encountered was often brutal and exploitative. In conclusion, the story of Pocahontas and John Smith is a legendary one that has been romanticized in books, movies, and TV shows. However, the truth is that we don't know much about Pocahontas and the story of her meeting. John Smith is not supported by any historical evidence. It's possible that there is some truth to the story, but it's also possible that it is entirely a myth. What we do know is that Pocahontas was a Native American princess who lived during a time of great change and upheaval in North America. She played an important role in the early history of the United States, and her story continues to fascinate people today.